Hey everybody, this is That Mexican with Essence Design Media, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make the complement to a simple server I made last tutorial. And we're going to do that by making a simple client. And I went ahead and made a GUI for it to make it a little bit more easier. And for this tutorial we're also going to need a class in order to make the client. It's not that I actually need the class, it's just that I'll make it easier since I decided to make the client form of it a GUI. So I'm going to go ahead and name it client. Pretty simple. Now let me just go ahead and clean up some of these comments. Alright. Here we go. So we're going to need a few imports in order to be able to make the client. So we first start off with java.io.io exception, and that's going to be to handle any errors that can occur during networking phase, so we're able to handle them. Second, we're going to need java.io.object input stream. That's so we're able to handle any input the server throws at the client. Java.io.object output stream, so we're actually able to send content to the server. Java.net.inet address, and finally java.net.socket. Notice that we don't have java.net.serversocket because this is the client. So now that you have your imports, you want to go ahead and make your variables. So I went ahead and added an object for type socket, an object for type output stream, and an object for type input stream. So now that I have these, I want to make sure I actually instantiate them in, let's say, a constructor. So in my constructor, I go ahead and initialize everything to null, just so it's all clean and it's nothing by default, basically. Now I went ahead and created a setup method. Now in this method, I'm going to actually set up the networking so it could connect to the server, and by default it's going to connect to a server that's on localhost. So I go ahead and add my basic try catch block because you need it for networking in case any error happens to occur. Then I go ahead and associate the client to a socket, first with the address, then with the port. In my case, the port I decided to choose was 1337. Next, I decided to add some safe gates, basically, to make sure that if a client is connected, I should actually go ahead and get the streams. Now get streams isn't yet implemented, but I like coding ahead of myself so I kind of plan out what else to make. And then of course if there's failure, just print out to console, failed to connect the server. So some initial checks never really hurt. And finally, I go ahead and finish up my setup method by printing out an error in case something goes bad, and then purposely breaking the client and make sure that instead of getting assigned to a port and address, if this fails, it gets assigned to nothing basically. So basically the port gets freed up and it doesn't cause future errors if you're trying to debug or anything. So it basically crashes the program, crashes and burns everything to make sure that later on your life will be easier. So now that I finished setup, I see that I have yet to implement the getStreams method that I promised I would make. So let me go ahead and actually make the getStreams method now. Alright, so here it is as promised. It has stopped. Whoops, set a breakpoint. It stopped complaining about it because now it's created. Now I want to make sure that anything that I do in here bubbles up by throwing the exception and bubbling up to the next method. So basically, setup catches it, and it goes to setups, try catch block, and it's caught by this. I'm doing this for cleanliness of code, so I don't need try catch blocks in every little method I make. So setup will be the main try catch exception capture basically. So that is my reasoning behind why getStreams is just throwing an exception, is so it could bubble up to setups try catch block. So now the getStreams in this tutorial is going to be similar to the getStreams in the server tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and create them now. Again, like in the last tutorial, I create my output stream first. Gotta make sure that it gets created first before the input stream. And I also want to make sure that I flush it right as I create it too, so it can be nice and clean and ready for output. Then last but not least, my input stream. So we're pretty much done with the getStreams method. That's pretty simple. Alright, so now we got setup, we got getStreams. What's next is basically the main purpose of the client, so it can send data to the server. So we should probably make a method of some sort to actually carry that out. And making a send command method, my bad, would be appropriate for that. So in here we could access clients send command method and be able to send information to the server that way. The reason it's public is so it's accessible from another level, whereas private is just more of a class specific method that shouldn't really be accessed by the programmer in order to manipulate the client object. So yet again we start with our usual try and catch block for networking, and then we actually want to go ahead and add the code to communicate with the server. Now this is going to be somewhat similar to getStreams, where we use the output object, except this time we'll be using it to actually communicate with the server. So this will write an object, which the object in this case will be a string. It'll write it to the server, and then we're going to go ahead and flush the output buffer so it can be clean for the next time we go ahead and use it. Then I go ahead and then just add something in the catch block so we know an error occurred. Now you may notice that in this method, unlike the last method which we created, does not bubble up an exception. Well, the reason this is because this will bubble up from where send command was called, and from there you'll have to handle it yourself, because getStreams is getting basically called at the same time setup is called, which is up here. And this try and catch block will be able to handle it, but there we go. Send command is never called from within setup, so that is why we do not have a throws exception in the actual send command method. So now that we have our basic layout for what our client really is going to need, we should probably clean it all up now to make sure that any networking that goes on after this program is done executing will be clean. So to accomplish that, I create a close connection method. And this is basically going to close everything up and make sure that this is ready to go for the next run. So if you guys guessed correctly, yes, we're going to need another try-catch statement for this. Then I'm just going to go ahead and close all the networking objects I created in reverse order in which they were created. That is the way you close networking objects, so they can be closed properly, so you do not encounter any errors. So in my example, it's output, input, and closing the client. The client would be last, since it's the first one hooked up. Then in get streams, we call the get output stream first, then input stream. So output stream closes first, then input, then client. It goes in basically the reverse order in which they were assigned and created. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add some statement in here to let us know that an error occurred. And that should be good enough for these simple purposes. Now, since I don't always want to close this immediately, let's say I want to jump around in my my GUI and use it in multiple calls without making it global, I could go ahead and let the system do the cleanup for me automatically when this basically goes out of scope, this entire thing. So let me separate this. There we go. And I'm going to do an override for the finalize method. And to do that, you got to make sure they have an ampersand and override right above the method which you're going to use to override. And in this case, I'm going to be overriding the finalize method for this object. Now finalize does not get called by the programmer. It gets called by the garbage collector when it's time for cleanup. So basically when this is ready for cleanup, I want to make sure that the garbage collector collector, my bad, knows to call the close connections method, which will basically do all this for us. And this should be it for the client. Now we can move on to our GUI. So I'm going to go ahead, make a method, and attach it to the send button. Whoops. Alright. Mouse clicked. There we go. And it threw me down here. Cool. Alright. So I'm going to go ahead now and actually create the object. The client object, that is, which we were working on this entire time. Alright. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it inside simple client GUI's own constructor. Oops. There we go. Now, each time the send button is clicked, I want to make sure that it gets whatever is in my text box and sends it over to the server. So, in my case, I name my text box txt message. There we go. I forgot to capitalize the S in string. And I'm going to go ahead and use the method that we created. Oh, whoops. Actually, I should create it out here. And initialize it only in the constructor. There we go. Forgot client. There you go. Now it knows what type it is. Whoops, but before we do that, I almost forgot to do one of the most important things. And actually, whoops, nope. Call a client's setup method. So now we should be able to send things to the server. Right now, all I should need to do is call a client's send command method and make sure I put message in there so it knows exactly what to send. And that basically is how you make a simple server, and we don't need to worry about any cleanup because client has a finalize method, and that finalize method will be called by the garbage collector, and the garbage collector will call the close connection, which will do all the cleanup for us, so we don't have to worry about that. And that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.